When did everyone in class have to save the teacher? Mrs. Sandoval walked into class carrying an empty pickle jar and placed it on her desk. We need to get this filled up with $1,000 by the end of the week. Before we could ask why, she explained that her 6-year-old son Darian was in the hospital with a serious condition and needed to stay there for specialized treatment. The jar started filling up immediately. Brian dropped in a 20, Sage added her lunch money, and soon everyone was contributing whatever they could. By the end of Monday, the jar had about $200. Mrs. Sandoval thanked us with tears in her eyes and carefully placed the jar on the corner of her desk where everyone could see it. Tuesday brought more donations. Kids from other classes heard about Darian. The football team took up a collection. Drama Club donated their fundraiser profits. By lunch, the jar was nearly 3/4 full, and Mrs. Sandoval was beaming. She broke down crying tears of joy during lab experiments, and we could see her glancing at the filling jar throughout class. Someone had taped a photo of Darian to the side, a sweet kid with glasses holding a toy dinosaur. But then Wednesday morning, everything changed. Mrs. Sandoval arrived to find her classroom door already open and the money jar gone. Her desk drawers had been pulled out and papers were scattered everywhere. The photo of Darian was on the floor, torn in half. She stood frozen in the doorway before letting out a sound I'll never forget. The principal was called immediately along with school security. They reviewed camera footage from the hallway, but the angles didn't show who entered the room. The only thing visible was a figure in dark clothing carrying something jar-shaped around 6 a.m. Everyone was questioned, but nobody admitted to seeing anything suspicious. The whole school was in uproar, and the school board held an emergency meeting about the theft. Meanwhile, Mrs. Sandoval sat at her desk staring at the empty spot where the jar had been. Principal Williams made an announcement that the theft was being investigated by local police. He said anyone with information should come forward immediately. He also said the school would try its best to reimburse the stolen money from emergency funds so Darian could still get treatment. But bureaucracy moved slowly, and forms needed approval from the district office. Thursday passed with no leads on the thief. Mrs. Sandoval barely taught, just went through the motions while obviously devastated. We tried to restart collections, but the principal said no more money jars for liability reasons. The GoFundMe page Haley created was gaining traction, but not fast enough. Darian needed the treatment by Friday. That's when things got weird. During lunch, I saw Mr. Campbell from the history department acting strangely by his car. He kept looking around nervously while loading something into his trunk. When he saw me watching, he quickly slammed it shut and walked away. Something about his behavior seemed off, but I couldn't place why. After school, I mentioned it to Brian, who said he'd noticed Mr. Campbell had been absent Wednesday morning. Sage chimed in that she'd seen him near the science wing early that day when she'd arrived for jazz band practice. We started piecing together timeline details that made us suspicious. Mr. Campbell's classroom was right down the hall from Mrs. Sandoval's. We decided to do our own investigation since the official one was going nowhere. Haley distracted Mr. Campbell with questions about his class, while Brian and I snuck into his room. We didn't find anything obvious, but Sage noticed his trash can had glass fragments at the bottom. They looked like they could be from a jar. Friday morning, the janitor found the empty money jar in the dumpster behind the school. It had been wiped clean of fingerprints, but one detail stood out: a parking pass sticker on the bottom. The kind teachers put on items to mark them for the lost and found. The number on the sticker led directly to Mr. Campbell's assigned parking spot. Security footage from the parking lot showed Mr. Campbell throwing a bag into the dumpster Thursday evening. When confronted by police, he broke down and confessed. He'd stolen the money to pay off gambling debts that were destroying his marriage. He'd justified it by telling himself the school would reimburse it anyway so Darian wouldn't suffer. The money was gone, already paid to his creditors. Mr. Campbell was arrested and led out in handcuffs while everyone watched. Mrs. Sandoval had to be physically restrained from attacking him. The school rushed through the emergency funds, but by then it was too late. Darian had been transferred to a different facility that morning. I visited Mrs. Sandoval at her home that weekend. She'd taken leave from teaching to be with Darian full-time. She looked exhausted, but managed a weak smile when she saw me at her door. I gave her an envelope with money collected from students outside of school. She hugged me and invited me in for tea. We sat in her kitchen, surrounded by medical bills and insurance paperwork. She told me Darian was stable but not improving at the new facility. They were still hoping to get him back to the specialty hospital once funds were available. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. The detective called this morning. They found evidence Mr. Campbell had help. Another teacher knew about the theft and helped plan it. I stared at her in shock. My hands stayed wrapped around the cold teacup while Mrs. Sandoval's words echoed in my head. Another teacher helped steal from a sick 6-year-old. I watched her shuffle through more paperwork, her movements slow and tired. The kitchen felt too quiet except for the ticking clock above the stove. I wanted to say something helpful, but my brain couldn't form words. Mrs. Sandoval picked up another medical bill, and her shoulders sagged even more. I finally managed to ask if the detective said who it was. She shook her head and explained they were still investigating but had solid evidence. My mind raced through every teacher at the school, trying to figure out who could do something so awful. Mrs. Sandoval stood up to refill the kettle, and I noticed her hands shaking. I helped her carry the teapot back to the table. She gave me that same weak smile and said I should probably get going. I hugged her goodbye and promised to keep helping however I could. Walking to my car, I pulled out my phone and sent a group text to Brian, Sage, and Haley. Emergency meeting now. Found out something huge. The responses came back immediately with question marks and worried emojis. I told them to meet at Brian's house in 20 minutes. The drive there felt longer than usual, as I kept thinking about which teacher it could be. Brian's parents were out shopping when we all arrived, which was perfect timing. We sat in his basement rec room where nobody could overhear us. I explained everything Mrs. Sandoval had told me about the second teacher. Brian's face went red with anger while Sage covered her mouth in shock. Haley immediately started asking questions about what exactly the detective had said. I repeated Mrs. Sandoval's words as carefully as I could remember them. Everyone started throwing out names of teachers who seemed suspicious or had access to the science wing. Brian wanted to confront every teacher until someone confessed. Sage reminded him that would just get us in trouble and might mess up the police investigation. Haley pulled out her laptop and suggested we make an organized list. She created 2 columns, one for facts we actually knew and one for guesses. The facts column was pretty short, but we kept adding to the guesses side. We wrote down that the theft happened Wednesday morning around 6 a.m. We noted that Mr. Campbell had been seen near the science wing by Sage. We added that someone had to disable the cameras, which meant they knew the system. After an hour of discussion, we agreed on some basic rules for investigating. No accusing anyone directly, no spreading rumors, and no doing anything illegal. We would only look at public information and share what we already knew with police. Sunday came and I spent the morning working up courage to call the detective. My parents were at church, so I had privacy in my room. I found Detective Barker's card that he'd given out during the initial investigation. My finger hovered over the call button for a full minute before I pressed it. The phone rang 3 times before he answered with a tired-sounding hello. I explained who I was and mentioned Sage seeing Mr. Campbell that morning. He asked me to slow down and repeat everything more clearly. I told him about our observations and asked what we were allowed to do to help. Detective Barker sighed and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. He said they were reviewing keycard logs from that morning to see who had building access. The cameras being offline wasn't random. Someone had deliberately disabled them. He explained that several cameras went down at exactly the same time, which meant system access. I asked if we could help somehow without interfering. He warned me firmly not to play detective or confront any staff members, but he said if we had already observed things, we could share those observations with him. He gave me his direct email and said to send anything we'd noticed. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and he thanked me before hanging up. I immediately texted the group about what he'd said. Everyone was frustrated that the investigation was moving so slowly while Darian suffered. Later that afternoon, I checked the GoFundMe page Haley had created for Darian. The donation counter showed it had basically stalled at around $300. I scrolled through the comments section, which had turned into a huge argument. Parents were fighting about school security policies and budget priorities. Some blamed the administration while others defended them. Nobody was talking about Darian anymore, just pointing fingers at each other. My chest felt tight reading all the angry comments while knowing Darian was stuck in that basic facility. Monday morning came and Principal Williams called a special assembly during first period. The whole school filed into the auditorium, whispering and speculating about what he'd say. He stood at the podium looking serious and waited for everyone to quiet down. His announcement was brief but firm about the ongoing investigation. He said all staff members were cooperating fully with police and providing any requested information. Then he told students to let the professionals handle the investigation and focus on their studies. The auditorium erupted in frustrated murmurs as soon as he finished. Everyone wanted to help, but we were being told to do nothing. I could feel the anger radiating from students around me. After the assembly, Haley pulled our group aside near the library. She had an idea that wouldn't interfere with the investigation but might help. She pointed out that staff schedules and department locations were all public information on the school website. We could figure out who had legitimate reasons to be near the science wing early. It wasn't interfering if we were just looking at information anyone could access. Brian and Sage agreed it was worth trying as long as we stayed careful. We decided to meet after school to go through the public records together. My science class had a substitute teacher filling in for Mrs. Sandoval. The sub was young and seemed really nervous trying to manage our class. Someone asked when Mrs. Sandoval would be back, and the sub went quiet. She said quietly that Mrs. Sandoval was taking care of family matters. Then she added something interesting about the camera system going down being weird. She quickly changed the subject to our lab assignment, but I'd heard enough. After school, I decided to call the hospital about Darian's situation. I found the main number online and dialed from my bedroom. The receptionist answered and I asked about payment options for patients who couldn't afford care. She asked if I was calling about a specific patient, and I explained about Darian. She transferred me to someone in financial counseling named Alina Vargas. Alina picked up right away and started explaining different programs the hospital offered for families who couldn't pay full price. She rattled off names like bridge care and emergency medical assistance while I grabbed a pen and started scribbling notes on the back of an envelope. She mentioned specific dollar amounts we'd need to raise, $8,000 for the bridge program, $12,000 for full coverage, and gave me deadlines that made my head spin. The numbers felt huge, but at least we had real targets now instead of just hoping. She told me to gather tax documents and proof of financial hardship, which would take time Mrs. Sandoval didn't have. I I wrote down every phone number and website she mentioned, filling 3 pages with information about forms and requirements. After hanging up, I sat at my desk staring at all the notes, trying to figure out how to make any of this work in time. Monday morning, I headed to the school early to drop off copies of the information for Mrs. Sandoval, but found a substitute teacher setting up the classroom. The sub said Mrs. Sandoval was taking care of family matters and wouldn't be back for a while. Walking to my locker, I passed the main bulletin board and noticed a new staff memo about updated lab access protocols. The memo listed new security measures and mentioned that department chairs had special privileges for early morning equipment maintenance. Something about that detail stuck in my mind as I headed to first period. Throughout the day, I kept thinking about who could get into the science wing before regular hours. At lunch, I watched teachers moving through the hallways and started noticing their different ID badges. Some had regular white cards, while others wore blue lanyards that looked fancier. During dismissal, I paid closer attention and realized the blue ones belonged to department chairs. The regular teachers just had basic key cards, but the department chairs had master access to their whole wing. I made mental notes about which teachers had which type of badge, trying to remember who I'd seen where. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Sandoval thanking me for visiting and the donation envelope. She mentioned drowning in insurance paperwork and said Darian was asking about his dinosaur book. The message was only 2 sentences, but I could feel how tired she was. I wanted to offer more help, but knew she needed to focus on her son right now. Saturday felt long and quiet, but Sunday night, Brian texted our group to meet at his house. Sage and Haley showed up within minutes, and we spread out on his bedroom floor with the school website pulled up on Haley's laptop. We started mapping out which teachers worked in which departments and where their classrooms were located. Brian drew a rough sketch of the school layout, while Sage looked up parking assignments from the staff directory. The science wing only had 12 classrooms, and most teachers wouldn't have any reason to be there at 6 in the morning. We made a list of everyone who taught science, plus the janitors and admin staff who might have access. The list was shorter than expected, maybe 15 people total who could realistically get into that area before school. Saiji suddenly sat up straight and said she remembered something important from that Wednesday morning. She'd arrived super early for jazz band practice and saw someone with a blue department chair lanyard near the science wing entrance. She couldn't remember the face, but that blue lanyard stood out because most teachers weren't there yet. We all leaned forward as she tried to remember more details, but she could only recall the lanyard color. Brian said we shouldn't jump to conclusions without proof, but this was the first real lead we had. We spent another hour planning how to gather more information without making wild accusations that could hurt innocent teachers. Brian would try to get badge swipe records through official channels since his mom worked at the district office. I'd keep talking to Detective Barker to share what we learned and see what he could tell us. Haley would research the technical side of the camera system to understand how someone could disable it. Seiji would try to remember more details about that morning and maybe ask other band kids if they saw anything. We agreed to be careful and work through proper channels instead of sneaking around like we did with Mr. Campbell. Tuesday morning, I went to the main office and asked the secretary for a student information request form. She looked confused but found one in a filing cabinet and helped me fill it out. I requested anonymized badge swipe data for the science wing from that Wednesday morning, explaining it was for a school safety project. The secretary said she'd send it to the district office for processing. Within 2 hours, I got an email back saying the information was exempt from student requests for security reasons. They offered to provide a heavily redacted summary in about 2 weeks, which would be way too late. I felt frustrated, but at least I'd tried the official route first. During lunch, my phone rang with Detective Barker's number, and I stepped outside to answer. He said he'd been reviewing the technical logs and found something interesting about the hallway camera. The camera went offline at exactly 5:45 a.m. and came back online at 6:10 a.m., supposedly for maintenance. The problem was no maintenance had been scheduled, and the outage happened right when the theft occurred. Someone with system access had deliberately disabled that camera to create a blind spot. My pulse sped up, but I kept my voice steady and told him about the blue lanyard Sage had seen. He thanked me for the information and said they were already investigating staff with system access. After school, I wandered past the janitor's closet and saw one of the custodians organizing supplies. I asked casually how camera problems usually got reported and fixed. He explained that each wing had someone in charge of technical issues who would notice problems and contact IT. For the science wing, he said the science department chair handled those requests and had override access for emergencies. The pieces were starting to come together, but we still didn't know which department chair might be involved. That's when I decided to check the school website on my laptop that Tuesday evening. I scrolled through the faculty page until I found the science department section, and there it was, Ms. Deborah Hartman listed as department chair. She'd been teaching chemistry for 15 years, and the page showed all these awards she'd won for teaching excellence. She ran the Science Olympiad team and had photos of her students winning state competitions year after year. Looking at her smiling face in the faculty photo made my stomach twist, because this wasn't someone you'd ever suspect of anything bad. I kept staring at her accomplishments and wondering if we were completely wrong about everything, but the facts kept pointing back to someone with department chair access. That night, my mom drove me to the school board meeting that was already packed when we arrived. Parents were standing along the walls, and the overflow crowd spilled into the hallway where speakers had been set up. The public comment section started with angry voices demanding answers about how someone could steal from a sick child. One parent stood up and said the school's fundraising ban was punishing students for adult failures. Another mom talked about losing faith in the school's ability to protect anything after this theft. When my turn came, I walked to the microphone with shaking legs and kept my comments short, just explaining that Darian needed help now and we couldn't wait for investigations to finish. I didn't mention any teacher names or our suspicions about the department chair, but several people nodded when I described the medical timeline. The board members wrote notes and thanked me for speaking, but offered no real solutions beyond promising to review policies. Wednesday morning started badly when Principal Williams called me to his office before first period. He closed the door and sat behind his desk with a serious expression that made my hands sweat. He said he'd heard I was asking questions about staff members and looking into things that weren't my business. His voice stayed calm but firm as he explained that interfering with a police investigation could result in suspension or worse. He mentioned something about liability and legal complications if students made false accusations against teachers. Fear shot through my chest, but I kept my face neutral and nodded like I understood. I promised to be careful and let the professionals handle things, even though inside I wanted to argue about how slow everything was moving. He watched me for a long moment before dismissing me with a warning look that made it clear he meant business. My phone buzzed during second period with an email from Alina Vargas at the hospital financial office. She'd attached a detailed checklist for the charity care application with dozens of required documents and forms. The list looked overwhelming with requirements for tax returns and medical records and proof of hardship. She mentioned in the email that media attention could help with private donations and expedite the charity review process. At the bottom, she'd included contact information for the hospital's PR department and suggested we craft a careful story about Darian's situation. I forwarded it to Haley immediately since she was better at writing than me. Lunch came and Haley pulled out her laptop to show us the draft she'd written about Darian. She'd focused on his medical needs and included that photo of him with his dinosaur toy. The article didn't mention the theft or investigation at all, just talked about a 6-year-old boy who needed specialized treatment. We sat there debating whether to release it because we worried it might somehow mess up the police investigation. Brian thought we should just do it, but Sage said we needed Mrs. Sandoval's permission first. After 10 minutes of back and forth, we agreed to send it to Mrs. Sandoval and let her decide. While we were eating, Sage mentioned something that made us all stop chewing. She remembered that last semester when money went missing from the debate club fundraiser, Deborah Hartman had been the one pushing hard for new controls. She'd given this whole presentation at a faculty meeting about preventing theft and requiring multiple signatures for any classroom collections. At the time, everyone thought she was just being responsible, but now it seemed different. Was she trying to prevent more thefts, or was she covering her own tracks by acting super concerned about security? We couldn't tell, but it definitely seemed worth remembering. Brian had stayed after school Tuesday to put up posters for a club event and decided to check the staff lounge bulletin board. He found something interesting tucked behind other papers, a maintenance ticket for the camera system. The ticket showed the camera outage was reported at 6:20 a.m. Wednesday morning, but that was after the theft already happened. The supposed maintenance window was listed as 5:45 to 6:10, but the ticket wasn't created until after that window closed. He took a photo with his phone and texted it to our group chat immediately. The timestamp didn't match up at all with what we'd been told about scheduled maintenance. I called Detective Barker right after school Wednesday and told him about the maintenance ticket timestamp. His voice perked up with interest when I explained the discrepancy Brian had found. He said they could trace who created that ticket through the system logs and thanked me for the information. Then his tone got serious, and he firmly told me we needed to step back and let them handle it from here. I agreed, even though it felt frustrating to stop when we were finding useful stuff. At least I felt proud that we'd discovered something the police could actually use. Thursday morning, Mrs. Sandoval gave us permission to publish Darian's story, and Haley submitted it through the hospital PR department. Within hours, the article was live on their website, and we started sharing it everywhere we could. By Thursday afternoon, it was getting picked up by local news sites and shared hundreds of times on social media. The GoFundMe donations started climbing again as people read about Darian's situation. Then around 4 o'clock, a local radio station called asking if Mrs. Sandoval would do a phone interview about her son. She agreed to speak with them briefly, even though I could hear the exhaustion in her voice when she called to tell me about it. The next morning at the school, the hallways were buzzing with whispers, and everyone had their own theory about who helped Mr. Campbell steal the money. During second period, I heard a group of kids saying Mr. Peterson from the math department must have been involved since his classroom was near the science wing too. More people started repeating this rumor, and by lunch, Mr. Peterson was getting dirty looks in the hallway, even though there was zero proof he'd done anything wrong. I found the group spreading the rumor near the vending machines and told them to knock it off because accusing innocent teachers without facts was making everything worse, and we needed actual evidence, not wild guesses that could ruin someone's career. Thursday dragged on with everyone still talking about the theft, and I kept thinking about what Mrs. Sandoval had told me about a second teacher being involved. After last period, I went to my locker to grab my chemistry textbook and found a folded piece of paper shoved through the vents that hadn't been there at lunch. My hands started shaking as I unfolded it and read the message written in blue pen that said, "Check who requested the camera reboot credentials." I looked around the empty hallway, But whoever left the note was long gone, and I had no idea who knew something but was too scared to come forward directly. I took a photo of the note with my phone and texted it to Brian, Sage, and Haley immediately, then headed to Brian's house, where we'd agreed to meet after school. Brian's cousin Jake worked at a tech company downtown, and Brian had asked him to come over and explain how security systems worked since we were hitting dead ends with our requests for information. Jake sat at Brian's kitchen table and pulled out his laptop to show us how access logs worked at his company, and explained that every time someone logged into a system, it created a record with timestamps and user IDs. He said we were asking for the wrong thing when we requested video footage because that was considered security sensitive. But the service log for when someone rebooted the cameras was just technical documentation that might not have the same restrictions. Friday morning, I walked into Principal Williams's office before first period with a new request form I'd typed up asking specifically for the camera reboot service log, not the video files themselves. I made sure to copy Detective Barker on the request to show we were working through proper channels and not trying to go around anyone. Principal Williams looked annoyed as he read through my request, and his jaw tightened when he saw I'd copied the detective, but he signed the form and said he'd send it to District IT. Within an hour, I got an email from his office saying service logs were internal technical documents, not available to students for security reasons. But then Detective Barker replied to the same email chain saying he would request the logs directly from District 1T as part of the official investigation and thanked me for bringing this to his attention. The bureaucracy was moving at a snail's pace, but at least having the police involved meant someone with actual authority was pushing for the information we needed. Friday afternoon, during 6th period, my phone buzzed with a call from Alina at the hospital, and I asked for a bathroom pass to answer it. She had good news for once, saying a local charity had reviewed Darian's case and made a partial pledge for his care, but we needed to document the community support and show specific financial hardship to unlock their matching funds. She gave me exact numbers, saying we needed to raise $8,000 total, and if we could get $4,000 from the community, the charity would match it, which would be enough to get Darian back to the specialty hospital. After school, Haley gathered us at her house and said since the principal banned fundraising at the school, we should organize something off campus at the coffee shop on Main Street, where her older sister worked. She'd already talked to the owner, who agreed to donate 20% of Friday evening sales if we could pack the place with supporters. We spent the next 2 hours making flyers and posting on social media to spread the word about the fundraiser, and it felt good to actually do something positive instead of just investigating and waiting for bureaucracy. Saturday morning, I was eating cereal when my phone rang, and Detective Barker's name showed up on the screen, making my heart start pounding. He said he had a significant update and confirmed the camera reboot was definitely requested from a staff account that had department chair privileges, which meant only a handful of people could have done it. He wouldn't tell me whose account specifically, but said the circle was getting much smaller, and they were close to identifying the second person involved. That afternoon, I went to the library for a science outreach event my little sister wanted to attend, and saw Deborah Hartman at one of the demonstration tables teaching kids about chemical reactions. She was patient with every question and made complex ideas simple for the elementary school kids gathered around her table, and even helped a shy girl mix the ingredients for slime when the kid was too nervous to try alone. Watching her interact with the children made my stomach twist, because it was hard to imagine this caring teacher being involved in stealing money meant for a sick 6-year-old. Later that afternoon, Haley texted our group chat with a screenshot from social media where a substitute teacher had messaged her after seeing posts about the fundraiser. The sub said they'd arrived at the school around 6 that Wednesday morning to prep for covering a sick teacher's classes and noticed the science office door was propped open, which was weird since nobody should have been in there that early. This detail matched up with everything else we'd been piecing together and proved someone was definitely in that area right when the theft happened, making another piece of the puzzle click into place. Sunday morning, Brian texted our group chat about something weird he'd seen the night before when he'd gone back to the school to get his forgotten math book. The teachers' union rep was in the main office meeting with a bunch of teachers and handing out papers while talking about legal stuff. Brian said he could hear them through the door, telling everyone not to talk to anybody without a lawyer, which made it sound like people were really scared about getting blamed for something. The whole meeting looked super serious, with teachers taking notes and asking questions about their rights, and Brian said he recognized at least 5 different department heads in there, including the ones from math and English. While we were still talking about what this meant, my phone rang, and it was Alina from the hospital calling with news about Darian's treatment options. She explained that if we could raise $8,000 by next week and get the charity pledge she'd mentioned earlier, then the hospital had this special bridge program that could take Darian back right away. The amount seemed huge, but she said with everything the community had already shown, plus the media attention, it might actually be possible if people kept helping out. After hanging up, I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop screen, trying to decide if I should email Deborah Hartman directly about the lab access stuff we'd been hearing about. My fingers kept typing and deleting different versions of the email, trying to make it sound like I just wanted to know about general security policies for a school project, instead of basically accusing her of helping steal from a sick kid. Finally, I typed up something that seemed okay, asking if I could meet with her Monday to discuss lab safety procedures for my science fair project, and hit send before I could change my mind again. My hands were literally sweating as I watched the sent notification pop up, and I kept checking my email every 5 minutes until she replied saying I could come by her office before first period. Monday morning, I showed up at Deborah Hartman's office 10 minutes early and sat in the hallway watching other teachers walk by, giving me weird looks, probably wondering why a student was there so early. When she opened her door and was invited me in, she seemed normal at first, but I could tell something was off by how she kept arranging papers on her desk and not really looking at me directly. I asked about general lab access procedures and mentioned hearing about camera problems in the science wing, and she got really stiff saying she'd logged an issue after another teacher mentioned it, but couldn't remember who told her about it first. The way she picked her words so carefully and kept her arms crossed made it obvious she was hiding something. And when I asked about early morning access for equipment checks, she said only department chairs had that privilege, then quickly changed the subject to my science fair project. After leaving her office, I felt sick knowing I'd basically just talked to someone who probably helped steal money meant for a 6-year-old's medical treatment, but I couldn't prove anything yet. That afternoon, Detective Barker called with huge news saying the district IT department had given him metadata from the system showing the camera reboot was actually requested at 5:47 a.m., which was way before anybody supposedly found out about the theft. This meant someone had planned ahead to turn off the cameras before stealing the money, which was basically proof this wasn't some random crime of opportunity, but something planned out. While I was still processing this, Haley sent a photo to our group chat that a band parent had given her from Wednesday morning when they were dropping their kid off super early for jazz band practice. The photo showed someone wearing a blue department chair lanyard, walking near the science wing at 5:50 a.m., and even though it was blurry, you could tell it was an adult in dark clothes carrying something. Combined with everything else, we knew this was getting really obvious who was involved, even if we couldn't see the face clearly in the picture. I called Detective Barker right away to tell him about my meeting with Deborah Hartman, and he asked me to come to the police station to write an official statement about everything, including her weird behavior and careful answers. He made it really clear I shouldn't contact her again or do anything else that might mess up their investigation while they built their case against her. Writing that statement felt heavy because I knew it could destroy a teacher's whole career, but then I remembered Darian stuck in that other facility and knew this had to happen for him to get justice. Tuesday morning, Principal Williams sent out an email about a mandatory staff forum on trust and safety in our school community and said students could come listen but not participate in the discussion. When we all filed into the auditorium, you could feel how tense everything was with teachers sitting in groups whispering to each other and looking around nervously like they didn't know who to trust anymore. The forum started with Principal Williams talking about recent events affecting our community, but then Deborah Hartman stood up and asked to speak, which made everyone go silent. She gave this whole emotional speech about how grief affects school communities and how policy failures put teachers in impossible positions where they have to watch families suffer while bureaucracy moves at a snail's pace. Her voice actually cracked when she mentioned Mrs. Sandoval's situation, and I could see real tears in her eyes, which made everything even more confusing, because how could someone who seemed to care so much also help steal that money? Tuesday afternoon, Detective Barker called me again saying they finally had probable cause for a search warrant for Deborah Hartman's office, based on all the system access evidence and timeline stuff we'd helped uncover. He said things were moving into the final phase of the investigation, and they'd probably execute the warrant within the next day or two, which meant everything was about to come out in the open. Tuesday evening, Brian texted everyone to meet at the coffee shop on Main Street, where we'd been planning the fundraiser. The owner had already put up posters in the windows and cleared space for donation boxes by the register. Haley showed us the social media posts she'd scheduled, and the local news station had confirmed they'd send a reporter Wednesday evening. Brian's mom worked at the radio station and got them to agree to mention it during drive time. We made lists of who would bring what and divided up shifts for working the donation table. Mrs. Sandoval arrived looking tired but grateful when we showed her everything we'd organized. She agreed to record a short thank you message for the radio, but said she couldn't promise not to cry. Wednesday morning, I got to the school early and saw 3 police cars parked outside the science wing. Detective Barker was there with 2 other officers carrying evidence bags out of the building. Through the window, I could see them searching through Deborah Hartman's desk drawers and filing cabinets. One officer held up a piece of paper and called the others over to look at it. They put it in an evidence bag along with what looked like a key on a lanyard. My stomach felt sick even though we'd known this was coming. Other students started gathering to watch, and teachers were whispering in the hallways. Principal Williams came out and told everyone to get to class, but nobody really moved. The police carried out several boxes of papers and a laptop computer. Deborah Hartman arrived for work and stopped dead when she saw the police cars. Detective Barker walked over and spoke to her quietly while showing her some paperwork. Her face went white, and she started shaking her head. The union representative appeared within minutes and pulled her aside for a quick conversation. Principal Williams announced over the intercom that classes would continue as normal, but you could tell his voice was strained. During lunch, the news spread that Deborah had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Someone said they saw her crying in her car before driving away. The substitute filling in for her looked scared and kept the door locked between classes. Wednesday afternoon, we set up for the fundraiser, and people started arriving early. The coffee shop filled up fast with parents, students, and community members who'd heard about it online. The donation jars filled up quickly, and people kept stuffing bills into them even when they got too full. The news crew showed up and interviewed several people about why they came to support Darian. Mrs. Sandoval's recorded message played on the radio right at 6 o'clock when the most people would hear it. Her voice cracked when she thanked everyone, but she got through it. By 8 o'clock, we'd raised over $6,000 and people were still coming in. Haley kept updating the online total and watching it climb higher. The coffee shop owner announced he'd match 10% of whatever we raised. When we finally counted everything, it was almost $7,000 total. I drove to Mrs. Sandoval's house that night even though it was late. She answered the door in pajamas looking exhausted, but invited me in anyway. I told her the fundraiser had gone amazing and showed her the donation total on my phone. Then I carefully mentioned that the police had made progress on finding the second person involved. She nodded slowly and said she'd figured it was someone from the science department based on the questions Detective Barker had been asking. I didn't say Deborah's name since nothing was official yet, but Mrs. Sandoval seemed to already know. She made us both tea, and we sat quietly for a while before I left. Thursday morning, my phone rang early, and it was Alina from the hospital. Her voice sounded excited as she told me the combination of our fundraising, the charity match, and an emergency medical grant had pushed us over the threshold. She said she was starting Darian's transfer paperwork right away, and he could be back at the specialty hospital by tomorrow. I actually jumped out of bed and did a stupid little dance in my room. She said she'd already called Mrs. Sandoval, who had broken down crying on the phone. The relief felt overwhelming, but I knew we still had to see if the treatment would work. At the school, everyone was talking about Deborah Hartman being questioned by police. Someone's parent worked at the district office and said she'd been there all morning with her lawyer. Detective Barker had presented evidence about the camera system and the spare key she'd never returned. Thursday afternoon, the news came out that she'd finally admitted to helping Mr. Campbell. She told them about explaining the emergency reimbursement policy to him and making sure he could get into the science office. She kept insisting she didn't take any money herself and thought the district would cover it quickly. Her lawyer released a statement about how she'd been trying to help a colleague in crisis and made a terrible error in judgment. That evening, the local news reported that Mr. Campbell had agreed to a plea deal for reduced charges if he testified against Deborah. She was facing charges for conspiracy to commit theft and tampering with security equipment. The school parking lot was full of news vans and reporters trying to interview anyone who would talk. Parents were arguing on social media about whether the teachers deserved jail time or counseling. Some people said the real crime was how little teachers got paid and how bad the mental health support was. Others said stealing from a sick kid was unforgivable no matter what. Friday morning, Principal Williams held a mandatory assembly about moving forward as a community. He announced new policies for handling donations with proper oversight and locked deposit boxes. The district was creating an emergency fund for staff experiencing financial crisis with actual counselors to help. He said these changes came too late for this situation, but would prevent future problems. Nobody clapped when he finished talking. The best news came Friday afternoon when Mrs. Sandoval texted our group chat. Darian had been accepted back at the specialty hospital and would be transferred that evening. His treatment could restart immediately with the same doctor who'd been helping him before. She sent a photo of him in the transport van holding his favorite dinosaur and giving a weak thumbs up. The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down in the hallway. Brian found me there, and we just sat together for a while without talking. Everything we'd worked for had actually happened, even though it had been such a mess getting there. Friday evening, my phone buzzed with an email from a name I didn't recognize. Turns out it was Mr. Campbell's public defender saying Campbell wanted to send Mrs. Sandoval a written apology. I sat there staring at my phone screen for a long time, feeling my stomach twist up because part of me thought she shouldn't have to deal with his guilt on top of everything else, but it wasn't my call to make. I forwarded the email to Mrs. Sandoval with a short note saying I'd support whatever she decided. She didn't respond that night. Saturday morning, Brian texted our group to meet at his house because we needed to talk about everything that had happened. When I got there, Sage and Haley were already sitting on his back porch looking serious. Brian handed me a soda, and we all sat there for a minute before anyone spoke. We spent the next hour going over everything we'd done, from sneaking into Mr. Campbell's room to tracking down evidence, and we all agreed we'd gotten lucky. Nothing worse happened. Haley pulled up some articles about kids who got in serious trouble for playing detective, and we made a promise right there to always work through proper channels from now on. This whole thing had taught us that real investigations have real consequences, and we weren't cops or lawyers or anything like that. Saturday afternoon, my phone lit up with a text from Mrs. Sandoval to our group chat, just a photo of Darian's favorite dinosaur toy sitting on a hospital bed with clean white sheets. The message just said thank you with no long speech or anything, but that simple message hit harder than any big thank you would have. We all hearted the message, but nobody typed anything back, because what could you really say? Sunday morning, Detective Barker called me while I was eating breakfast and told me Deborah Hartman was cooperating fully with prosecutors now. He said her statement confirmed she really did believe the district would reimburse the money fast enough that Darian wouldn't be hurt, which didn't make what she did okay, but at least showed she wasn't trying to hurt a sick kid on purpose. The whole thing felt less black and white than I'd wanted it to be. Sunday afternoon, I drove to Mrs. Sandoval's house with the sealed envelope from Mr. Campbell's lawyer in my passenger seat. When she opened the door, she looked tired but calmer than before, and I handed her the letter without saying much. She took it and looked at it for a second before setting it on her hall table unopened. and I respected that she needed to deal with it in her own time without me watching. There wasn't going to be some big moment where she forgave him or tore it up or anything like that. Real life doesn't work that way. Monday evening, the school held what they called a support gathering in the cafeteria, but it wasn't like a regular assembly with speeches and everything. People just brought food for families dealing with stuff and sat together at the tables, talking quietly, or not talking at all. A lot of teachers showed up even though they didn't have to, and some parents brought casseroles and sandwiches. Nobody made any big announcements or tried to make it about the theft. It was just people showing up for each other. Sometimes that's all you can do. By midweek, I'd been thinking about everything that happened and decided I wanted to do something useful with what I'd learned. I started putting together some materials about safe fundraising and basic money stuff for younger kids, things like how to track donations properly and why you need adults involved. The school counselor helped me set up times to meet with middle school classes during their advisory periods. It felt better to focus on helping prevent future problems instead of staying mad about what already happened. Friday afternoon finally came, and Mrs. Sandoval had given me permission to visit Darian at the specialty hospital for a few minutes. I'd bought him a book about dinosaurs with lots of pictures and facts. Nothing too heavy for a sick kid to hold. When I walked into his room, he was propped up in bed looking tired but alert, and his whole face lit up when he saw the book. He showed me his collection of toy dinosaurs all lined up on the table next to his bed, explaining which ones were meat eaters and which ones ate plants. His voice was quiet but excited, and when I left after 15 minutes to let him rest, I felt genuinely hopeful for the first time since this whole mess started. With the right treatment and all these people supporting him, this brave little kid actually had a real shot at getting better. Thanks for hanging in there with me through all my questions and wondering. It's always interesting exploring this stuff together. Until we meet again, I'll catch you later. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.